everybody. It is Wednesday, September 18th. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm Mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. On this September 18th, National Cheeseburger Day.
Nom, 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 nom. Moshe, I think the bigger food, beverage-related headline is that coffee has some serious health benefits, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast.
Yeah, you know how we bring you the medical news that like stuff that we eat or drink is like bad for you? Well, yesterday, midday, I saw the headline, and Jill, I sent to you within seconds of seeing it. I was like, there's a good news story about drinking coffee. The latest study, the study comes out that it's bad for you. It's good for you. Well, there's a good for you study today, and so we decided to bring it to you. And Jill, I think your response on the text message was great.
Yes, I was great on many levels. I was looking for a good story to end the podcast.
That reinforces something you're already doing because most of the stories are like, well, Jill, the product you're using is bad for you and your kids. The food you're eating is bad for you and your kids. Well, once in a while, we're going to bring you a good news story.
Yes, finally, I don't need to change my behavior because of a new study.
For now.
All right, let's get to some headlines. Starting in the Middle East, a massive coordinated attack involving pagers. Yes, old school pagers like us 90s kids used to use, targeting Hezbollah across Lebanon and Syria. There are several dead and nearly 3,000 injured. We've got all of the details. And it comes as Israel has set a new goal for the war, returning all of its evacuated citizens who live along that northern border with Lebanon back to their homes. In tech news, what Instagram's doing to keep kids safe online. And Moshe, I know you were at Meta headquarters earlier on Tuesday.
Yeah, I got a sneak peek and a sense of what they're doing in person. We'll bring that to you as they really are under the gun at Instagram to do more to protect kids.
Sean Diddy Combs charged with federal sex trafficking and ordered to be held without bail. To politics, the House is expected to vote today on a doomed bill to avoid a government shutdown. So Moshe, again, that bill expected to not pass.
We're still going to tell you about it because we're approaching another deadline, as we do here. Jill, it's been a while without a government shutdown. Will they or won't they? Well, we're back because why not? Congress is doing what it does, taking things up until the deadline and past the deadline, voting on things that they know won't pass, doing things that Congress, excels at.
And sticking with politics, there's been a lot of talk about protecting IVF access, including by former President Trump. Well, Democrats held a vote yesterday trying to challenge that assertion. And as I mentioned, good news for everyone like me, pretty much obsessed with their morning cup of coffee. Some new research shows it can have some serious health benefits. Plus, Moshe has on this day in history.
Jill, your clue today: don't rain on my parade.
Barbra Streisand's birthday. It's got to be something Barbra Streisand related.
Yeah, you're very close. Something Babs.
But let's start in the Middle East in a storyline ripped from the Netflix show Fauda. Old-fashioned pagers that thousands of members of the Hezbollah terror group have been using to communicate all simultaneously exploded at about 3:30 p.m. local time Tuesday afternoon. Most of the exploding pagers were in the southern suburbs of Beirut, but there were some explosions throughout Lebanon and Syria. At least 9 people have been killed, including 1 child. The Lebanese government and Hezbollah, which operates pretty freely in Lebanon and uses the country to launch attacks on Israel, say that over 2,800 people have been injured because of those exploding pagers. Among those wounded was Iran's ambassador to Lebanon. The mysterious explosions came amid rising tensions between Israel and the Iran-backed terror group, which has been launching attacks on Israel since last October 7th in concert with Hamas in Gaza. Israel's been returning fire and appears to have been behind this attack, although the Israeli government is not confirming that. The pagers that blew up had apparently been acquired by Hezbollah after the group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, ordered members in February to stop using cell phones. Their concern with cell phones is that they could be tracked by Israeli intelligence. The Israelis have previously taken out top leaders of the group by following their cell phone signals. So Hezbollah has decided to go throwback and use pagers to communicate. A Hezbollah official says the pagers were a new brand, but declined to say how long they had been in use. Again, Israel not claiming responsibility, in fact, not commenting at all. But Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad are vowing retaliation against Israel. So, Moshe, the big question, if it was Israel, how did they do it? Well, it could not immediately be determined. But there are a couple of theories. One is that Israeli intelligence sent some sort of message to the pagers, which shorted the batteries, causing them to explode. Another theory, someone physically sabotaged them, assuming that the pagers are routinely collected, stored, and distributed by Hezbollah. And Moshe, it comes as the Israeli government, again, has set this new war goal, which includes the safe return of tens of thousands of Israeli residents who've been displaced from their homes near Israel's northern border with Lebanon due to months of fighting with Hezbollah.
Yeah, so there's a lot here to get through. We all had to do a double take yesterday when we were like, wait, first of all, they're using pagers. Pagers are going off. You might have seen some of the videos. We included a couple on our Instagram account where you see people standing in line at the grocery store, in a market, and then the pagers exploding, sometimes in their hands, sometimes in their pockets, in some cases, some very serious injuries, in some cases, not so much, but widespread across the country. You noted, Jill, among those injured, Iran's ambassador to Lebanon. Why does he have one of those pagers? Well, Iran is the chief sponsor of Hezbollah. They provide them with weapons, ammunition, support, monetary support, political support, etc. So probably not that surprising there. And it comes, as you say, that Israel has changed its war goal. It really wants to bring home the Israelis. Nearly 100,000 Israelis live in the northern part of Israel on the Lebanon border. They've had to live in hotels and in other parts of the country for almost a year now as they face daily attacks from Hezbollah. They're putting a lot of pressure on the Israeli government. Let us go home. Do something to end this low-scale war. In fact, in some cases, the war between Israel and Hezbollah some days is more pronounced than the war you see in Gaza. And so the Israelis here really taking things up a notch in a very creative way, though, again, they won't acknowledge it's them. But if you look at the sophistication of the attack and you look at whose goals were served here, pretty much everyone will acknowledge that, one party is probably responsible here. That's the Israelis. One intel analyst telling the Wall Street Journal, it seems like this is a Mossad operation, Mossad being the CIA equivalent in Israel, that's been planned for a while. The analyst saying it sends a significant message to Hezbollah, we can get you anywhere. And it very much affects morale. I mean, literally explosions in your own pocket, in your own home. In the case of that child, the child of one of the Hezbollah fighters. Jill, you laid out a couple possibilities here. While some say it could have been some sort of signal that shorted out the battery, leading to an explosion. Given how large some of these explosions were, the feeling is more of the second thing you laid out, a supply chain attack, meaning the Israelis somehow got a hold of a whole bunch of pagers headed to Lebanon that they knew were headed for Hezbollah here, and were able to pack the pagers here with several grams of military-grade explosive. The big thing here for the Israelis, post-October 7th, reestablished deterrence. Israel's a country of about 10 million people, 7 million Jews, in a region that has 500 million Arabs. October 7th, the world watched as Hamas was able to invade, surprise, shock, embarrass the Israelis. And so what Israel's been really trying to do here for the past year is reestablish deterrence in a region where it has many enemies. So you've been seeing here these various covert operations to showcase to the neighbors, including terror groups, Iran, etc., do not mess with the Israelis. So they took out the top Hezbollah commander in Beirut in an airstrike. He was somebody who had eluded them for several decades. They also took out a founding member of Hamas in Beirut recently, also in Lebanon. They took out a top Iranian commanders in Damascus, Syria. That led to that back and forth earlier this spring. Of course, we reported to you that they took out the leader of Hamas in his room during the presidential inauguration in Tehran. Still unclear exactly how that went down. The point is, Israel has been trying to showcase to anyone who might pursue, their various military aims against it, that they shouldn't mess around. And this is probably the most significant of the attacks we've seen in a while. Still have to see what the potential retaliation is here, but Tensions remain high across the region, especially in light of this attack. And it comes, Jill, as the Israelis announced yesterday that it had actually thwarted a Hezbollah attack against a top Israeli senior official inside Israel. So the Israelis are declaring victory here on that front. Again, not commenting on the pager attack. But I guess, for Hezbollah, now that you can't communicate via cell phone and can't communicate via pager, it makes coordination and communication between members of that terror group even more challenging, which was clearly one of the goals here of the Israelis. It also is very easy to point out to everyone in Lebanon who is affiliated with Hamas with explosions in the pockets of those who were carrying these pagers.
And the video was just wild, Moshe, because just this idea that they're getting these pages and then the pagers are exploding.
Yeah.
Just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Jill, the videos were at a fruit stand, a grocery store, and apparently some members of Hezbollah felt that their pagers were heating up at one point, so some of them disposed of them before they exploded. But again, we'll wait to hear on potentially how this went down. But like you said at the top, feels like it's out of a TV show.
Okay, now to another story that we talk about a lot here on the podcast, kids and social media. On Tuesday, Instagram laid out a round of changes to try to shield kids from harm. This includes making more than 100 million accounts that belong to teenagers private, enhancing parental supervision, and setting messaging restrictions as the default. So starting this week, all teen accounts on Instagram in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia will be notified that Instagram plans to automatically place their accounts under new protective settings that limit who can contact them and what content they can see. The changes will take effect within the next 60 days. Teens who sign up for Instagram moving forward will automatically have the new settings, and they'll also be encouraged via a prompt to close the app after 60 minutes and automatically be placed in sleep mode between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Moshe, I know you spent Tuesday at a Meta event about these types of changes. What did you learn?
Jill, they're trying to take this very seriously over at Meta, knowing they are under the gun here. It's notable that these new tools were announced just ahead of today when a House committee is going to be weighing amendments to what's called the Kids Online Safety Act and other child privacy legislation that was passed by the Senate earlier this summer. We've talked about how much scrutiny they are under on Capitol Hill. We covered that hearing when senators made Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, stand up, turn around, and apologize to families whose kids had suffered, in some cases died, due to issues they faced on Meta platforms. So the measures here reflect the rising concerns among parents, among political leaders of both parties, that the social media sites are contributing to a youth mental health crisis. We covered in June as the Surgeon General called for cigarette-like labels on social media to warn of the potential mental health risks. And on top of that, at the state level, they're facing dozens of state attorneys general who have filed lawsuits against the company, accusing Meta of knowingly hooking children on its apps while playing down the risks. So they made a point yesterday of inviting me, 100 plus creators, parenting experts. They've had a lot of folks weighing in on this. Some say they're overdue for some of these measures, but they are hopeful that this will help. Also, a recognition yesterday, Jill, as they were talking, that parents can't do it alone. We've talked about the mental health crisis for parents right now. And so the realization is these platforms have to do more. Parents already have enough pressure these days. Of course, there's devices, there's social media, and so there's pressure now for these platforms, these multi-billion-dollar platforms, these hundreds of billions of dollars worth of platforms to do more. One of the things they made a point of distinguishing is that not all teens are the same, right? There's 13 to 15-year-olds, and there's 16 and 17-year-olds. A 17-year-old is very different from a 13-year-old. They can drive, they have much more responsibility, and so they tried to nuance here the types of restrictions and the types of options teens have in those various age demographics. So, for example, they all go to private, but if you're 16 or 17 years old, you have a chance to opt out. Whereas if you're 13, 14, or 15, parents are given a lot more control here. In fact, you need to connect as a kid between your account and your parents' account, and they have to give you permission to be able to access certain things. Parents will also be given tools to see who their child has been messaging, but they will not be able to see the messages themselves. They can also view the teens' content topics, what types of topics and content that they are seeing. The hope here is this leads to actual dialogue between teens and their parents, because literally you need to connect your accounts to prevent teens from lying about their age. Apparently, they're going to be rolling out ways to verify their age, such as via government-issued ID, facial scans, a whole variety of methods by country here that they will be rolling out. Jill, you mentioned 100 million teens. That's around the world. This begins now in the coming days and weeks in the US, Canada, and a handful of countries. They are planning to roll this out around the world here. But one big issue, kids these days, kids of all ages at all times, have always figured out ways around various rules and regulations here. So there are some teens that have already created adult accounts. They've, basically put out a fake birth date. That's going to require a little bit more work here of Instagram. Now they do plan to scan and create technology in order to figure out if this is a 14-year-old masquerading as a 35-year-old on Instagram via the accounts that they follow, the types of topics that they follow, their friends, etc. But that's going to take a while here. They acknowledge, that this is. They acknowledge that they have a lot to do, but they are trying their best here to ensure a safe environment for teens. So yesterday at the event, they had Elisa Pressman, who's been on this podcast before, parenting expert. She took questions alongside Jessica Alba, actually, who is very invested in these issues. Elisa Pressman saying that, one size does not fit all. Every family is different. You know your kid. And so ultimately, in terms of when you let them on, what exceptions you make is up to each family, but encouraging a conversation, a dialogue, and in response to the question or accusation that parents might get from their kids saying, "You're the only parent doing this. You're the worst parent in the world for not giving me access to XYZ." She reminds you, you are not. There are many parents doing this. And in fact, it takes a village here. So the more friends and parents of your child's classmates you can get in on this, taking this seriously, the easier this can be for everybody.
And Moshe, I don't think that it is a coincidence that it comes at a time when there's just been a big push from people like Jonathan Haidt, who you interviewed on the Interview podcast, and others to just basically keep their kids off social media. Until they're at least 16 or 13 or a certain age where they feel it's appropriate. So Instagram or Meta trying to almost get ahead of it and say, look, we'll do more. We'll keep them safe. Please don't leave.
Please, we can't have them all leave. I mean, I think, they recognize that, right? That there's a larger movement. First of all, legally it's 13, right? In many cases, people say, keep them off till 16, keep them off till 18. It's up to various parents, communities, schools, all of that. I think, I think that putting their finger to the wind here, seeing the direction things are going in, Meta is saying, no, we can create a safe environment. Don't keep your kids off of our platforms entirely until they're 18. So they're trying to strike a balance here. They're trying to say, again, they can keep kids safe, but it comes as, as I noted, the movement is happening on Capitol Hill. There's the movement to get kids completely off of social media here. One thing that they made a point of, and I think, we talked about it on the Haidt podcast, is also not allowing kids on after a certain hour, having them get their sleep. Sleep is so important in those years. You're going through puberty. And so, well, really, sleep is important at all ages, but especially during that time. And so, they're trying to come up with key features here that they hope will reassure parents that these platforms are safe for their kids.
Time for the speed read from CNN, a follow-up to a story that we first reported yesterday. And just a warning, the details of this story may not be appropriate for kids especially. So this would be your chance to maybe skip forward a couple of minutes. We learned Tuesday the very serious charges that rapper Sean Diddy Combs is facing in federal court. Yesterday, he pleaded not guilty to racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking charges. According to a CNN correspondent in the courtroom, he stood briefly and said not guilty in a clear voice. The indictment from the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York charges Combs with 3 counts. So you've got racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The reporter said that Combs was wearing a black T-shirt and gray workout pants with a black stripe down the side and, quote, looked stunned. And then a judge ordered him to be held without bail, even though his lawyers had argued that he is not a flight risk, and offered a $50 million bail. No dice there.
Jill, this is very serious. He faces life in prison. He's a 54-year-old rap mogul, hip hop mogul. We first, a lot of us were introduced to him in the 90s. He named his label Bad Boy Records. I guess when somebody says who they are, you should
believe them,
right? Isn't that how the old expression goes? But just shocking details in this indictment. Of course, we knew Monday night he was arrested. And then we learned the details as they unsealed them yesterday. So he's accused of leading a criminal enterprise. The first charge in the indictment is racketeering conspiracy, a federal crime to target organized criminal syndicates, such as the mafia. In his case, the Combs enterprise consisted of Combs, the leader, business entities, including his record label, the aforementioned Bad Boy Entertainment, employees, associates, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, supervisors. There were a lot of people working as part of this. What were they doing? Well, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for the purposes of prostitution, coercion, enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, obstruction of justice. Jill, you read this indictment, you're like, this is Diddy? This sounds like the mafia. This sounds like a terrorist group. The indictment notes a 2016 video of Combs beating a woman. This is one we talked about earlier this year. It accuses Combs of years of abuse, notes that surveillance video that was obtained by CNN earlier this year of him beating his then girlfriend, Cassie, at an LA hotel and dragging her back to the room. Remember, she filed a case against him and they settled that within one day. Well, here we learned in this indictment, Jill, that was not the only thing he was up to. He's accused of inducing multiple female victims, male sex workers, into drugged, sometimes days-long sexual performances they called freak-offs. He called freak-offs that he would record. Some details here. They seized 1,000 bottles of lubricant and oil for what he dubbed the freak-off supplies. They also seized a couple AR-15 guns in his bedroom closet that were loaded. The serial numbers on those guns were defaced. Jill, it goes on and on here. Apparently, he kept videos of the victims engaging in various acts. Sometimes he took videos of them without their knowledge because he drugged them up. He then used those videos to exert control over the victims. He would use these sensitive, embarrassing, incriminating recordings to ensure control, obedience, silence of these victims. It goes on, but we'll stop there.
From the Washington Post, Shutdown, Showdown Part 100. Here we go again.
Is that where we're at? Yeah.
Is that why I lost count? So I just said 100. With a deadline coming up on October 1st, that's less than 2 weeks away. The House will vote today on the plan by Speaker Mike Johnson to fund the government. Although the proposal lacks even enough Republican votes to pass, and it could deal the GOP a setback in government funding negotiations as this shutdown deadline nears. So Johnson's legislation would basically just extend federal funding at its current spending levels for 6 months. And then it would also wrap in a measure that the House already passed that requires proof of citizenship to register to vote in national elections. But Republicans across the ideological spectrum, from defense hawks to penny pinchers, oppose the plan in numbers enough to sink the bill if all of the Democrats oppose it.
Yeah, and so it's not enough that there's a fight within the Republican Party about how to fund the government here. The Democratic-controlled Senate is like, no, why are you attaching a provision about citizens and voting to funding the government. It's what Congress does. They attach things. Sometimes they call those poison pills. President Biden says he would veto the legislation. They just want a clean funding extension here. But then you have some Republicans say we should be increasing our defense spending. You also got the Secret Service on Capitol Hill saying, hey, in the aftermath of Trump, we need more money here to operate the Secret Service. So there's a fight within Republicans about how much to fund for how long. And then you have the Democrats weighing in. Then you have the Republicans adding other measures here. All that with less than 2 weeks to go here. The current funding expires midnight, September 30th, without an extension. Most of the federal government will shut down. And it comes as millions of Americans are already beginning to vote in November's election. So interesting political ramifications there. As far as this bill, again, likely will not succeed today, even if it does. As I mentioned, the Senate won't pass it. Non-citizen voting, the reason why they're adding it to this is because Republicans want to make that a prominent issue. It's already illegal in federal elections. Cases of voter fraud committed by non-citizens are pretty non-existent, but still Republicans have made it a point, as we talk about Trump and elections. There's only been a few dozen cases of this over time. Typically, when you're a non-citizen, you don't want to call attention to yourself by trying to vote, of all things. That said, that's an issue here. The funding is an issue, and there's a whole bunch of options here. Typically, how this goes, Jill, we've covered a few of these by now. They're going to take it up until the last possible second, maybe give themselves a couple-day extension here. Though there are some Republicans who say, let's shut down the government. Let's have a real discussion about how we're spending our money here. Among those is J.D. Vance. Among those is Donald Trump, who's saying maybe a shutdown wouldn't be bad. Again, interesting presidential politics at play here. Who's to blame? Is it the president and Democrats? Is it Republicans here? But it looks like they're going to take this up into the wire, if not beyond that.
And Moshe, I know that you've been hearing on the mo.news Instagram account from people who work for the government and would be directly impacted by a shutdown, including members of the military.
Yeah. When the government shuts down, a lot of people don't get paid. You know who still gets paid? Congress. And so a lot of people are saying, hey, maybe they wouldn't shut us down if they were actually impacted by this. Somebody goes, how about we propose that they do not get paid until they balance the budget? Our military community is so tired of this ridiculous behavior. Someone else writes into the mo.news Instagram account. As a government employee who has been through several furloughs, I'm sick of continuing resolutions that kick the proverbial can down the road for future problems. Would rather there be a shutdown and see them actually come up with something than kick the can down the road. But still, the stress of the shutdown is getting to all of us. And then another person saying Congress should forego their checks if they want to show any sympathy for the rest of us who will be impacted by this.
But why would they ever do that, Moshe?
No, Congress doesn't have to. Why would they give up their own paycheck?
And sticking with politics from Politico, Senate Republicans blocked passage on Tuesday of a Democratic bill that would federally protect access to IVF and require public and private insurance coverage of IVF and other fertility treatments. The 51-44 vote fell far short of the 60 vote threshold that Democrats needed to overcome a filibuster. Only Senators Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska, and Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, broke with the rest of the GOP to support the bill, just as they did when they voted down the same bill earlier this year. Republicans argued that the measure was both unnecessary and problematically broad, and they dismissed it as a political stunt that they felt no pressure to endorse.
A political stunt that Democrats are proud to put out there because they wanted to call things out. We've talked about how Donald Trump recently has come out very pro-IVF, right? He says recently on the campaign trail that IVF should be free for all Americans, that there should either be taxpayer funding for IVF or he's going to require insurance companies to cover procedures. So Democrats said, yeah, let's vote on that and show divisions within the Republican Party. Many Republicans showing in this vote yesterday, they're not ready for that, at least not the way that Democrats laid out this bill. Democrats saying, we're trying to prove our point here. So you had Republican Senator Mitt Romney say this was a messaging opportunity for Democrats. There were too many poison pills in this that Republicans find unacceptable in terms of how much was going to be spent on IVF. James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, says same song, second verse, Democrats pretending they're doing something on this. A reminder, Republicans have also put out a bill calling for protections for IVF. They don't go as far as the Democratic bill. So Democrats refuse to support that. Republicans refuse to support the Democratic bill here. And again, this is Democrats, trying to have a key point here. and prove that whatever Trump is saying, he wouldn't be able to even get it through his own party should he win the White House.
And finally, from CNN, a morning cup of coffee may do more than just perk you up, according to new research. Moderate amounts of caffeine intake, defined as about 3 cups of coffee or tea a day, were associated with a lower risk of developing cardiometabolic multimorbidity. This is according to the study's lead author. All right, what does this mean? It's actually just the coexistence of at least 2 cardiometabolic diseases, things like coronary heart disease, a stroke, and type 2 diabetes. The author says coffee and caffeine consumption may play an important protective role in almost all phases of CM development. Researchers analyzed data from about 180,000 people in the UK Biobank. It's a large biomedical database and research resource that follows people long term. The information included the participants' self-reported caffeine consumption through coffee or black or green tea, and then the cardiometabolic diseases that they developed through their primary care data.
So if this is UK Biobank, does that mean a lot of the tea came with milk? Is that something they controlled for in the study? Anyway, I don't have my tea with milk, but I know they do across the pond.
I love my tea with milk, actually. I'm so European.
You're so British. She has no British connections, said the narrator.
How do you know?
I don't know. Do you? I haven't looked at your 23andMe lately. I sensed it, Jill. I sensed it.
You sensed that this Long Islander did not have any connections.
Didn't come over in the Mayflower.
UK.
I don't feel like your ancestors did. Anyway, back to the story at hand here.
You'd be correct.
Yes. Okay. There you go. The story at hand here is that caffeine is good for you, but in moderation. You know, as they say, moderation is key. Because if you drink too much caffeine, that is bad for you. The study has found hypertension, other issues from too much caffeine. So keep it limited. It looks like 1 cup of coffee, maybe 2 cups of coffee. Let's be reasonable here, folks. The risk here, if you had 3 cups a day, the benefit to your health here appears to go down the more caffeine you have. But again, the sweet spot, according to this study, appears to be a limited amount of caffeine a day. Ultimately, is potentially helpful to all of you. So I hope as you listen to this podcast this morning, many of you are getting in your morning caffeine, and you should feel good about that, at least according to this study.
Moshe, I am one of those. I actually listen to this podcast in the morning as I drink my coffee. So Jill, hi. Hope you're enjoying it.
Hi, listener Jill. This is Anchor Jill.
Oh, it's very meta.
Refill your cup. You can have a second cup today. That's how good we feel about this story. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. Beginning in 1793, President George Washington laid the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol. The U.S. Capitol actually take a century to complete. Architects came and went. The British set fire to it in the War of 1812, but they actually set fire to it in 1814. It was used for troops during the Civil War, so it took a while there for them to finish it. By the way, when the British lit the Capitol on fire, Jill, rain saved the day. It saved it from total destruction, put out that fire before everything was destroyed. All right, on this day in 1947, the U.S. Air Force was established as a separate military branch. For decades, it was actually under the U.S. Army, and then post-World War II there, they made the Air Force its own thing. And on this day in 2020, 4 years ago, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the second woman to serve on the Supreme Court, died at the age of 87. A reminder, she was nominated to the bench back in the 90s by Bill Clinton. There was a push to get her to retire earlier, as opposed to stay on the court until her death, as Democrats were hoping to ensure they could replace her with another liberal. Of course, she would end up getting replaced by Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell pushing through the Amy Coney Barrett nomination with just weeks before the election. We end here with a bit of pop culture. On this day in 1964, The Addams Family premieres on ABC, then a TV show. It aired for a couple seasons there on ABC. Now to the answer to your clue. That is Barbra Streisand. You got that right, Jill. On this day in history, Funny Girl, the movie, opened in New York, starring Barbara, very young Barbra Streisand, and Omar Sharif. Of course, it would do very well on Broadway as well. We just saw a remake of it on Broadway a couple of years ago. My mother is a huge fan. My mother-in-law is a huge fan. My wife is a huge fan. And with all that, I imagine young Olivia will soon be introduced to Funny Girl, and I'll be taking her to a show in the coming years.
So, Moshe, when you saw the Funny Girl remake, was it with Leah Michele or Beanie Feldstein playing the Barbra Streisand character of Fanny Brice?
We saw Feldstein, though that was a very controversial choice. I know that Leah Michele got great reviews. They brought different things, I think. Leah Michele brought the singing and that aspect of the character. Beanie Feldstein, who can sing, definitely brought the comedic chops to Fanny Brice. So I think that's where she earned points there. But I know that there were issues on both fronts. I think Leah Michele gets a bad rap in certain cases from her co-stars, and Beanie, sort of had to leave early. So we'll see what they do next time they bring back Funny Girl to Broadway.
Not easy shoes to fill. Barbra Streisand.
That's the thing.
It's a tough role.
Can Leah win? It's so associated. If you see the original film or if you've seen the original show with Barbra, it's so associated with Barbra Streisand, and she's got big shoes to fill, as you say.
Beanie, by the way, is Jonah Hill's sister, in case you didn't know.
The Mo you know here on the pod.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Don't rain on anyone's parade today.
Don't rain. She's another one. I couldn't even attempt to start singing. It would just be too embarrassing.
No, it's like singing Whitney Houston.
Exactly. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.